Heidi Lobecker from Chester, New Jersey. Today I'll be reading Mr. Gibb's Banner Year from the Gravelight Press anthology, EXHUMED. Mr. Gibb's Banner Year. The kids of Stonebridge High School always crossed their fingers when they were in the gym. On the wall, a commemorative photograph of old Coach Rogers glared at them. The iron gray eyes gave Kevin, the quarterback for the Wildcats, tingles on the back of his neck. "What's he so mad at?" asked the new kid. "He's pissed we keep losing," said Kev. "His team's won a ton of championships, and now we just suck." "Chin up, Kevin," Principal Duggan said. "This year we'll turn it around. I'm recruiting a different coach, one with a history of winning." When the final bell rang, Principal Duggan watched the stream of people leave. He fingered an old black whistle in his pocket. He was looking for the new algebra teacher, Mr. Gibb. Mr. Gibb, with his lame handshake and doormat demeanor. "Ah, there he is." Principal Duggan recognized Mr. Gibb's shuffling gait. That man's shadow is more noticeable than he is. "Take a walk with me," Principal Duggan said, grabbing Mr. Gibb by the elbow. "Oh, okay," shrugged Mr. Gibb. The two men stood in the gym, the photograph of Coach Rogers hanging on the wall before them. The rank smell of old sweat and damp concrete hung heavy in the air. High above them, keeping company with the dust motes, hung 11 Division I state championship banners, the glory years of the legendary Coach Rogers. The faded red and black banners proved that though Rogers' memory lived on, his winning streak was neglected as the academic standards of Stonebridge High. Coach Rogers was an old school, hawk-faced man. 20 years ago, when Coach spoke, his team listened. Even now, his picture commanded respect. In it, he wore his starched shirt, black tie, horn-rimmed glasses, and a tweed hat. "That man gave his life for football," said Principal Duggan. Mr. Gibb mumbled a response and chewed his lower lip. His dull brown eyes glanced at the picture. Principal Duggan resigned himself to talking to this dud of a man. He told the story of Coach Rogers with the reverence it deserved. "We were playing the Vikings. Our men played sloppy, and old Coach Rogers couldn't stand sloppy. He was pacing the sidelines. He'd just given Ed, the tank, number 19, the next play, and then he grabbed his right arm in pain. He knelt on the grass. Just 6 minutes into the game, he collapsed on the 50-yard line. Ed quickly called a timeout and rushed to Coach Rogers' side. No heartbeat. He died on the field, right on the sidelines." "Huh," said Mr. Gibb. He tried to look suitably solemn. "He worked here right up until the day he died," said Principal Duggan. "That field is sacred ground." He gave Mr. Gibb a side eye. "Sacred ground," repeated Mr. Gibb dully. Mr. Gibb figured he'd die playing video games on his couch, his default pastime as he limped along through life. He hoped his neighbors found him before his dog Woody ate his face. He wouldn't mind if that happened, though. Woody was the only one ever really happy to see him. Prompted by the jock talk, Mr. Gibb said the burliest thing he could think of. "I used to be a volunteer referee for my nephew's football team." It sounded suitably athletic. "Oh? You got family around here?" asked Principal Duggan. "Not really. My sister's in the Army. They're in Germany now." Principal Duggan, always grasping and pawing at things, nodded eagerly. His big hands pushed Mr. Gibb forward into a dim office situated at the back of the locker rooms. Yes, I saw you were a referee on your resume," the principal said. "You have so much potential. We need a football coach to start summer training for the Wildcats right away." White globs of spit gathered at the edges of his mouth in his excitement. "Coach?" Mr. Gibb stammered, wanting to avoid responsibility. Oh, no, I couldn't do that. It's an extra $4,500 for the season, said Principal Duggan. Okay then, show me where to sit, said Mr. Gibb. Principal Duggan gestured to the cracked black, naga-hide covered chair patched with duct tape. It went with the worn metal desk, at least 20 years old. Great, Principal Duggan said. I'll leave you to it. Good luck. He hung the black whistle around Mr. Gibb's neck. He quickly closed the door and scuttled off before Mr. Gibb could change his mind. Principal Duggan walked out of the empty locker room. The dingy pipes leaked slow drips into the shallow puddles on the floor. The walls curled off strips of gray-green paint. The lockers hung half open, like dark mouths squeaking on rusted hinges. Principal Duggan stood in the gym, stared at Coach Rogers' picture and yelled, "He's perfect!" 11 red and black banners fluttered in a foul breeze. Even in the full heat of a sweltering August, in the small office, Mr. Gibb felt a cold chill. To distract himself from the decay, Mr. Gibb did a quick search for how to coach high school football. The gym stink condensed around him. 5 minutes into reading 15 tips for a great practice, Mr. Gibb felt lightheaded. Needing fresh air, he got up to open the door. It was stuck. The rotting frame had swollen in the humidity. He grabbed and pulled at the doorknob with wet, sweaty hands. The dull metal slipped around his slick palms. The door would not open. Heavy pressure in the air pushed down on his shoulders. He could not move. A fast wind slammed musty, mildewed playbooks off the shelves. The same wind, full of fists, pounded him, bam, 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 like players going after a running back at the bottom of a fumble pile. He desperately tried the door again, his hands scrabbling and clawing at the knob. A foul breath pressed his face. Frantic to get the door open, he pushed and pushed harder and harder. The air was dense and dank. The room shrunk around him. He pushed. The door slammed open. Breath uneven and short, he stumbled out. A helmet full of teen boy smell flew at Mr. Gibb's head. A solid hit. Mr. Gibb fell to the ground, unconscious. When he came to, he was dragging a 2-man sled from under the bleachers. He looked over, and 3 more sleds were lined up on the 10-yard line. His shirt was sweatier and smellier than it had ever been in his whole life. He realized he'd moved 300 pounds of steel, all on his own. He stood a little taller and smoothed his hair down across his balding scalp. He tried jogging as he went by the 50-yard line, blowing the old whistle as he went by. That night, Woody sniffed and snorted at him when he arrived home. The dog wouldn't come near him until he showered twice in extra hot water. He had to scrub hard to remove the fusty tang that clung to his body. It was 1 month before school, and the Wildcats prowled the field. All right, boys, let's get started. Mr. Gibb tried to command the team's attention, but they were much more invested in the phones they'd snuck onto the field. Boys, he tried again, I need you to listen. He's just a boring old dude with bad BO, said Kev, the quarterback, when the team gathered in the huddle. I want to work on my short game. Let's do some passing drills. Tired of insta-lurking the cheerleaders, the boys practiced a shotgun formation they knew. The ball arced fast and hard in the crisp fall air. Mr. Gibb, ineffectual as ever, decided to end the practice early when the dank smell rushed at him again. He sniffed the rot in the air and raised his puffy arms to wave it off, but he was too slow to stop the speeding football. The ball headed right for his temple. That pigskin missile didn't miss. Mr. Gibb woke up, smelling of jock itch, sitting at Coach Rogers' beat-up metal desk. Mr. Gibb's weak fingers pushed at the sore on his head. The boys were finishing up their showers and he caught bits of their conversations. Mr. Gibb was no joke at practice today. He ran our asses off. That way he showed us how to use a sideline to stop a running back was cool. Never would have guessed that old guy had it in him. The side of Mr. Gibb's head may have been tender, but for the first time in his life, his ego was full. His ego liked that. He stared at a well-worn red leather notebook placed in the middle of the desk. Written in careful cursive and proper penmanship taught by nuns were years of experience from Coach Rogers on what turns a boy into a football player. Mr. Gibb read what it took to transform an unfocused 100-pound 15-year-old into an all-state quarterback, how football makes men of boys, how to form those men into a team, how to lead that team to 3 consecutive state championships. Mr. Gibb pulled out his own notebook and began to take notes. Notes on making sure the boys took care of their uniforms, notes on how to build a team, how to let the boys find their strengths and weaknesses. He learned the importance of knowing how to act. He had a new game plan for practice. He would start by reminding the boys they needed to be class acts, not only playing football the right way, but how they conducted themselves. Mr. Gibb absorbed page after page of sage, straightforward advice the old coach whispered in his ear. He read a good 50 pages. Mr. Gibb gathered up his things and said goodbye to the boys. He noticed the team covered their noses when they talked to him, breathed through their mouths to avoid his scent. A nasty draft followed him out, pushed between his shoulder blades, making sure he stood up straight. He stopped at the store, loaded up on odor-removing laundry detergent, room spray, and extra-strength deodorant. He picked up extra treats for Woody. They were having a hard time living together. When he got home this night, his usually happy mutt rumbled and barked at him, circling around him with his hackles raised aggressively. Woody spent the night in the garage. Practices started going well, and when the Wildcats walked in the hall of the math wing, they growled low and deep. The normally apathetic students yelled hallway chants, "Go Cats, fight Cats!" Stonebridge hadn't shown this much school spirit in decades. Principal Duggan proudly told his wife the whole place sounded like the Tiger House at the zoo. At the front of his class, Mr. Gibb stood tall. He now wore button-down shirts and a black tie. The snarling, howling boys were his, showing up, digging deep. They came by to get him, to escort him to practice, the coach of their team. They didn't walk too close, though. They wanted more of his wisdom, more offensive plays, more strategies like using a short passing game to move down the field successfully. He liked the respect. He could never remember what he did to deserve it. "Glad to see you brought back the short passing game," said Principal Duggan. "That's how we would win back in the day." Mr. Gibb nodded. The attention and compliments felt good. He hung on to them to cover the taste of vomit in his mouth. He had pine tree fresheners in the pockets of his blazer to hide his rotten egg smell. No one dared say it to his face, but he heard the offensive line call him dank stank. He was sad when Woody ran away, his only real friend in life. He put up lost dog signs in the neighborhood featuring a big picture of the brown and white mutt. He spent a week looking for him, but in his heart of hearts, he knew Woody needed to be gone. Woody's frantic whining, pawing, and clawing at the door to get out, when feeding time came just about broke Mr. Gibb. At that moment, he wished he could run away with Woody and leave his sour milk stank back at the school. When Mr. Gibb inhaled deep to relax, he smelled what had permeated his soul. It was early September, and the new and improved Wildcats were ready for their first game of the season. Mr. Gibb led them onto the field, looking especially dapper in a new tweed hat. "How do you feel we'll do against the Vikings?" Principal Duggan asked. He was standing upwind from Mr. Gibb. Our team is ready. They know what to do. It's time we beat this team. Look what I found, Principal Duggan said. He held up a number 19 football jersey, properly cared for, just like Coach had taught him. I remember climbing into my pads for the first game and putting on this jersey. It was the best and worst day of my life. The first day I played in the game, the day you died. Coach looked at the jersey and nodded to the man before him. He'd always had high hopes for Ed the Tank Duggan. It was no surprise the boy had grown up to become principal of Stonebridge High School. Good to have you back, Coach, said Principal Duggan. Coach walked towards the 50-yard line, his iron gray eyes focused on his players, his mind already planning his next move. Good to be back, said Coach. He blew the old black whistle hard and sure. The players turned to him, fired up, ready to go. Best make room for another banner, Ed, yelled Coach over his shoulder to Duggan. After all, there's no championships when you're dead. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to pick up a copy of EXHUMED at gravelightpress.com. That's a copy of EXHUMED at gravelightpress.com. Thank you.